and welcome to another PBJ Learning review series. We are taking a look at some stuff from NCMEC, which is the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. They did a series in 2021 summer called Parent Connect, Child Safety Virtual Discussion Series, and this is the first of 5, I believe it is, videos that they did. And it's called Responsible Use of Social Media. We are doing some research to find out what kind of efforts are out there trying to keep kids safe and get parents and teachers to understand what's actually going on online. So we're going to give this thing a try. Looks like it's about a 40-minute video, so I'll be here and I'll stop as need be. All right, let's see what we got.
Welcome to Parent Connect. Thank you for taking time out of your busy lives to tune in for this first installment of our 5-part summer series hosted by the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. My name is Deborah Ortiz-Party. I am the Senior Outreach Manager with NCMEC, and I'm pleased to be facilitating this evening's discussion. Now, before we get started, I do want to make a quick mention that this is our second wave of Parent Connect webinars. We debuted the Parent Connect series last fall, and you can watch the recordings from the whole first series through your NCMEC Connect account that you use to log in for this webinar. So I do encourage you to check out the dynamic topics from that series if you missed it. Without further ado, we have an engaging discussion for you tonight about the responsible use of social media. And joining me is my colleague, Susan Kennedy, Senior Program Manager with the National Center, and Dana Miller, Justice Supervisor with the Wisconsin Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force. I'd like to give you each the opportunity to share a little bit with our audience more about yourselves and the work that you do. And shall we start with you, Susan?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you so much for the intro, Deborah. As Deborah said, I am at the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children as well. I'm Senior Program Manager over our prevention and our outreach programs. But before I came to NCMEC, I actually worked for about 10 years in child abuse, mostly child sexual abuse investigations, both on the intervention side as well as the prevention side. So that's kind of my background at in my career before NCMEC. I think importantly for tonight, I'm also a mom, just like many of you are parents as well. I have 2 school-aged kids, and I'm sure they'll come up at some point in the course of our conversation tonight.
Awesome. Thank you, Susan, for lending your voice to this discussion. And Dana, how about you? Can you tell us more about your work with the task force?
Absolutely, and thanks for having me. This is such an important topic, and I'm really excited to join both of you in this discussion. So I'm Dana Miller. I am with the Wisconsin Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force within the Wisconsin Department of Justice. We are a law enforcement task force. We work with law enforcement agencies throughout the state of Wisconsin on online crimes against children, crimes dealing with exploitation online. And we are the regional task force for the state of Wisconsin, and we are a part of a coordinated network of 61 regional task forces throughout the nation. And we all work on investigation, prosecution, and prevention of online exploitation against children.
Yes, and thank you so much for all the work that you do. And I'm so glad to have you both here for this discussion. And folks at home, Susan and Dana welcome your questions. So please feel free to drop those into the Q&A chat box at any time. Should you have any technical issues, you can drop those concerns into the normal chat box, and a moderator can assist you. And I'd like to thank my colleagues, Kathy and David, for helping out behind the scenes. Now let's get to the topic at hand. You know, the internet has become increasingly more interactive with the array of social media platforms available, along with social components of other functions online, such as gaming and watching videos. And those social aspects of the internet can be fun, they can be entertaining and even useful, but it also provides access from those who might have unsavory intentions and leaves opportunity for exposure to inappropriate content. You add a pandemic to the mix, and we get a recipe for heightened concerns. So let's start with the basics. We'll start with you, Susan. Typically, how and why are children accessing social media?
Yeah, thank you. So, I mean, starting with the how children get on social media, we know that most social media platforms have rules that you need to be 13 or older to have an account and use them. But we also know that many of our kids are on them at younger ages than that, for sure. One of the most common ways they get access or they're on social media is just that they're using our devices, right? So we as adults are signed in to TikTok, to YouTube, to Facebook, to whatever social media platform, you name it. And we're kind of perpetually signed in on our devices. And now our kids are using, whether it be the phone, the tablet, the home computer. So a lot of them are using social media on an adult's profile or platform. But also we know that you have to be 13, but the enforcement mechanisms aren't really there. So it's very easy to lie about your age and just say you're 13 when you're not 13 yet. And that's indeed how a lot of kids are on social media as well, as they have their own accounts, even below the age of 13. And as far as the why, I think, it's just helpful to think that kids are on social media for many of the same reasons that we're on social media. There's, as you said, Deborah, in the intro, like there's a lot of interesting things online. There's a lot of funny things online,
Mobile Device
especially during the pandemic. Outside world. So whether that, the news, influencers or people you respect and you want to know what they're thinking or what their take or the next thing that they're working on, you can find all of that on social media. And then also, of course, we can connect with people we know and friends and family. And again, particularly over the past year, for many of us, we've really leaned on technology like social media to stay up to date and in contact with people who maybe we're not seeing in person. So those are all kind of the reasons that people have been on social media. And I think especially in the past year, we can think of the even more important role that social media has played in many of our lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And, that makes me think about what level of parental involvement do you recommend for young children versus teens? And I'd like to hear from both of you on this. Dana, let's start with you.
Sure. So as with anything with internet safety, there's no right answer, right? There's no easy answer. And I'm going to say that it really depends. It depends on the family. It depends on the child. You as a parent know your child best. You know their responsibility level, their maturity level, kind of what they can handle. And I think that you have to take that into account as they are earning more trust and getting to do some things online without as much parental involvement. That being said, I really recommend using parental approvals at that younger age so you can get an idea of what your kids are interested in downloading as far as apps or games. You can do some research on those ahead of time, and then you can use that information to have discussions with your kids if they are not going to be able to use that. And then as they get older, you can kind of graduate to something else. There are a lot of other options, but I recommend just really using those privacy settings and doing a lot of discussions and regular check-ins with them on what those are set at. And that lets you really take a look at how that app can be used, who they can communicate, that kind of thing.
Awesome. What do you say, Susan?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all of that. And I think, one thing you're saying, Dana, is that the rules are going to change over time. And that's certainly true. And I think for parents, a lot of times when we do these talks, we get parents who are very interested in, monitoring and how often should I monitor and how can I make sure my child can't access anything bad, can't talk to any strangers. And the reality is, and I think we'll probably dive into this a little bit later, but no monitoring system is perfect. No parent you can't know everything your kid's doing online. That's just not a realistic expectation for you to be able to keep up with all of it or be able to monitor. So I think as parents, we kind of need to let go of that as a goal and think about our goal being more what you were saying, Dana, about checking in and talking with your child about what they're doing. Because our goal is really to produce a human that can operate in the world on their own. And we think about that in all the ways that we parent our kids and all the things we want them to be prepared for. And I think we need to include using social media, being on the internet as one of those things. So over time, we want to be increasing, like you said, our levels of.
So I wanted to jump in here. That at first I was kind of thinking, well, why are they talking about why kids would want to be using social media and what they would use it for? And I was like, that seems a bit ridiculous to actually say that. But the more that I'm listening to what she's saying, the more I'm realizing that there are parents that do need this kind of a place to start. So, we're already 8 minutes in, and we're still kind of discussing, what it is that kids are doing with social media. And that's a lot of time that we've already kind of blown on that. And necessary, maybe. How many parents are you going to be able to get to listen to this stuff? I don't know. I'm kind of thinking that whenever, because we're discussing doing something to kind of summarize all these things for people, I'm thinking that I'm not going to take 10 minutes to try to explain to somebody that their kids are using social media and why, because that seems like an awful lot of time to invest in it. But here's the thing that I really like about what you just said. We are trying to create kids and human beings that can work on their own. And that is our job. Our job is to teach kids how to navigate the world on their own. So it's a good thing to hear them saying this stuff, because you're never going to be able to, you can't stop kids. You can't, and there's no way you're going to know what they're doing. Okay, I'll let her get back to it.
Trust and how much kind of leash we give them online, and equipping them along the way with guidance and information and practicing critical thinking, so that our goal is to have have a kid who can navigate this stuff safely. And to do that, we have to be incremental in our monitoring over time.
Absolutely. And Dana, from a law enforcement perspective, what are some of the top risks that parents should be aware of regarding social media?
Sure. Yes. And again, that is so huge. There's so many things that we can be concerned about. But from our perspective, we're looking at things that are more in the exploitation realm. So we're looking mostly at who they're communicating with. Is that person telling the truth? Are they trying to pressure a child into doing things that are inappropriate or that the child doesn't want to do? And then what they're sharing. Are they oversharing? And that can look like a lot of different things. That can be personal information like your address, your school, your schedule, if you're going on vacation, those types of things that we tend to start talking to younger age groups about. Or it can be images, right? If we're oversharing images, we might be sharing risky images or things that just ramp up that risk level for us to be putting out there. So possibly nude images or even just sexualized content. So those are the things that we're seeing as kind of the risk factors that then all of this gets wrapped into. Sexting, sextortion, some of that location concerns, all those types of things.
Absolutely. And Susan, when it comes to the pandemic, how has the pandemic amplified some of these risk factors that Dana's talking about?
Yeah, so I think, all through the past 12 months, 15 months, whatever it's been, we've been talking about these concerns around the COVID-19 pandemic and what that environment means for kids. And certainly one of our first concerns was, gosh, kids are online a lot. They're going to school online. They're not having in-person play dates. They're home, right? Because we couldn't go anywhere, especially in the beginning. And so this creates increased access and increased opportunity. And indeed, at the National Center, our analysts saw some people that you were speaking, people with unsavory intentions, we could say, talking about this. Like, this is so great because kids are going to be home now. So certainly that's been a concern. And I think that's very valid and something we're all kind of thinking about. But whenever I talk about the concerns during the COVID-19 pandemic, I want to challenge us to think a little bit more broadly, especially as we're talking about social media, and think about the ways in which relationships have really shifted online in the past year. So, I said earlier, many of us have been using social media more. We're really communicating with our friends and families online. We're using those tools. I have coworkers I've never met in person. Like, we all have our relationship shifted online. And I think what we should think about is the idea that the good and the bad aspects of human relationships are shifting online or have shifted over the past year online. So I have some things listed here on the slide. Cyberbullying is kind of an easy one to understand. If a kid was being harassed or cyberbullied when they were in-person school, when school went virtual, they were probably experiencing some cyberbullying, right? Even if they hadn't before, because that's how those peers are communicating with that child, right? And then on here, and Dana talked a little bit about this, going into some of the risks we have or the things we think about for kids online. Sextortion is when someone is threatening or coercing or forcing in some way a child to do something sexual. Most often it's to produce one of those images, an image that's nude or partially nude or some way explicit. And the reason I have that up here is one of the most common dynamics in sextortion cases is actually between peers and teenage peers. So you have a dating couple, and during the relationship, they may exchange those kinds of images. then the relationship ends or goes south, or one partner becomes exploitative and abusive. And one way they can abuse their partner is to threaten to circulate those images and demand more images. So for people who were experiencing that kind of control and abuse in person, as the relationship increasingly went online, as all of our relationships had, there's more possibility for sextortion. Also, around self-production, so Dana talked about this as well. Self-production just means what it kind of sounds like, which is a child is creating that image that is exploitive. So the child depicted in the image is the one who made that image. I think it's fair to assume that there are teenagers in particular who, prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, would not have sent a sex message, would not have sent a nude, who did so during the pandemic, or who, agreed to undress on a live stream or a Snapchat feed or something like that. I think it's fair to assume, or we would logically think that behavior may have increased in the past year. And so not only does that creation of those images create opportunity for exploitation, they also open the door or increase vulnerability for sextortion as well, because obviously once someone has that image of you, they have something to threaten you with. So the ways that our relationships have shifted, our use of social media has increased. That's gonna logically, increase the possibility that kids could be harmed online, in addition to, anything else that's going on in their lives. And indeed, I think then when we look at our Cybertipline data, I don't know if we've mentioned this yet, but the Cybertipline is our national reporting hotline that the National Center for Missing Exploited Children runs. Anyone can make a report. We encourage everyone who sees suspected child exploitation online to make a report to it. And you can see in 2020, we did see an increase in reports, as we do many years, but we did see a big increase in 2020 over 2019. And I think
this seems like an important enough thing for me to make a note of, because I don't like seeing an increase like that. Online enticement reports, 97.5% increase of reports to the Cybertipline during 2020. Huh. Okay. Just need to take a couple seconds there, that's all.
Importantly for our conversation today, we saw a higher increase, in almost doubling, in fact, of our reports of online enticement. So online enticement is just whenever an adult contacts a child with the goal of doing something sexual. So asking the child to engage in sexual conversation, asking them to send that image, asking them to meet up in order to commit some kind of sexual offense. It could be a whole range of behaviors. Kind of anytime an adult solicits a child online, we call it online enticement, and we saw a doubling of those reports in 2020. So certainly those fears about the increased access, increased opportunity, and the ways that kids were living their lives, we're all living our lives online, is borne out in our data a little bit.
Yes, absolutely. It's a lot. It's a lot to digest. It's a lot for parents to think about. And to that point, what are some steps that parents can take to keep their children safer? And Dana, let's start with you on this one.
So first off, I want to mention, I think it's important that we focus on the behavior when we're talking about safety things. We've mentioned a couple of apps. I think that some apps get a bad rap, and in some cases, rightfully so, right? There are some things that just lend themselves to riskier behavior, like anonymity and those types of things. But I think it's really important to, instead of just saying, no, you can't use XYZ bad app, we talk instead about what appropriate behavior online looks like and what inappropriate behavior online looks like. And then that kind of carries forward across any app, hopefully, or any way that they're interacting online. So that's my first thing, is just kind of try to focus on the behavior instead of kind of nitpicking at those apps of the day that are being labeled as bad. And then I would just say, I tend to kind of pick a couple of things as my building blocks. So here's my basic 3 safety building blocks for my foundation. And then you can go out and you can learn more. You can add more tools to the toolbox, as Susan was saying. So one is going to be using those privacy settings, particularly. If you can use parental approvals on top of that with younger kids, I think it's great. But those privacy settings are going to let us set some agreed upon boundaries around things like who our kids can communicate with. Are our location settings being shared within the photos, or just generally, within a map or something like that within the app? Those are all really good things to know what the app is being used for, how people can reach out to your child, those types of things. My second thing is setting no screen times and no screen zones in the house. So we talk a lot about screen times, right? And saying like no phones at the dinner table or no phones after 8 p.m., let's say. And those phones have to go in a central location overnight so that we give our kids the opportunity to get that break from screen time and to do some offline activities and have some interests that involve some things offline. So I think that's really great to keep in mind. And then the other piece of that I like to recommend is no screen zones. So no screens in the bathroom. Let's just make that a rule for the whole household. And that's going to reduce a lot of the opportunity for risky decisions to take place. Another one that I would recommend maybe for ages particularly is no screens behind closed bedroom doors. That's an easy rule to put in place. And again, just helps reduce the opportunity for that risky decision to be made. And it gives the child a reason to say like, nope, can't be pressured into doing that thing you want me to do. Doors got to be closed. And then, as always, keep having those discussions early and often with your child about what they're doing online, because it's a big part of their life, and we have to be a part of that too. We have to know what they're doing online, so that we can be there as kind of that safety net for them through all of this.
Right. So you're talking about looking at the behaviors, minimizing opportunity, and talking about it, right? Susan, do you have anything to add to this robust list of things that parents can do? And coupled with that, how can parents get that conversation started?
Yeah, I think those are great building blocks and really kind of encapsulate the approach I think parents should take. Totally agree. And I love, I'm going to start stealing the screen zones because I hadn't thought about that before we started running through this. And I think that's a really good tip. And one that I have heard from our Cybertipline analysts in terms of when they're seeing risky content or even content that's kids acting age appropriately, but they're filming their activities and they're filming, exploring their bodies and things like that, that really becomes exploitive because they're putting online. A lot of that's happening, as you said, behind closed doors. So I think those are really good rules. And I like too how you said, it gives that teenager some cover in terms of saying no to a risky behavior they don't want to engage in. So I love all of that. I think, your third point about engaging in the conversation and really having open conversations with your kids, that's something that the National Center tries to really equip parents with some tools and some concrete ideas, because we've heard from parents like, that all sounds great, but I don't know what to say. Like literally, I don't know where to start. I don't know what words to use. So we've tried to give some of that to parents on our website. This is just a screen grab from our website. You can go to missingkids.org/netsmarts. There's a ton of topics there. You can scroll down. We have a how to talk about it section for all of our topics. And this is the social media one. And the nice thing is these are very general. So you can adapt them to your kid and the age that they're at and the ways that they are not using social media. And just, these are, just conversation starters to get that conversation going, as you said. And then we also have some resources that are split out by age. Do you want me to go ahead and go into that?
Yeah, because it's really important to start these conversations early, right? Mm-hmm. So absolutely.
Yeah, so that's another, I think, big headline piece of advice we would like to give parents is that you can't wait until your kid is 14, 15, 16 and then show up and say, by the way, what are you doing online? And now I want to be involved. You can do that. If you have a 15-year-old and you haven't done that, try it, do it. But you'll be more successful, it'll be easier if you have younger kids to start when they are young. When they first start using that tablet, they first start opening up that Chromebook. I know many of our kindergartners, maybe kids who didn't have their own devices, have Chromebooks this year, right? So start those conversations and that expectation that you're going to be kind of involved. And I think being involved in monitoring is one thing, but also being a resource to them so that you have talked to them about things that might happen online before they happen to them. And sadly, we know that even young kids, as I sort of just talked about with the videos, can be victimized online. We've seen sextortion victims as young as 8. And so we want to be talking to kids about these things before they happen. And so the National Center provides also some really age-specific resources for your kindergarten, first grade, second graders that kind of starts off these conversations in an age-appropriate, fun, engaging way, and tons of resources to equip teachers, scout leaders, parents to talk with kids about what they're seeing in the video and what it means for their online life. So that's all available on our website. And I know the links are flying in the chat right now so that you can find those things easily.
Yeah, and there's also a lot of great tip sheets as well for parents and for youth that folks can grab off of the website as well on a variety of different topics. Do you want to highlight any of those, Susan?
Yeah, real quick, the Protecting Kids Online is one of the things that I refer to the most. It outlines a lot of what Dana was just saying in terms of those building blocks and gives parents some ideas of how to establish those things, the ground rules, the researching the platform. So it's kind of a handy guide, for you to print off and look at, or also to share with others in your family or your community. And then the checklist that you see on the left there is just what it sounds like. It's a way to go through with your teenager, talk about those account settings, talk about what's okay to post, what your expectations are of a parent, just a way to kind of go through. These are all the things we need to think about before I let you, my 13-year-old, officially have an Instagram account and hop on there. Let's go through this checklist and consider all these things and have a conversation about it. So these are just resources on our website in Spanish and English that are totally free to download and use as you want.
Awesome. And Dana, you have resources as well on your website with the ICAC, and some of those resources are also specific to platforms. Can you tell us more about what folks can find there?
Absolutely. So we actually, I'll say this, I'll give you guys a plug and bounce back to the information Susan just shared. We use a lot of NetSmart's resources as part of our state task force, and then as part of the national task force as well. So love all of your guys' stuff, love Into the Cloud. And if you've got young kids, I absolutely recommend that, because those conversations are easier to have if you start with them young versus jumping right into a heavier subject as a teenager, like Susan had mentioned. So please, please, please start those conversations when they're young and when it's easy for you, because then it'll make it easier to transition as they get older. So on our website, you can see there, icac.widoj.gov. We've got a few different things. We put out a bi-weekly podcast. That's so that people can get safety information on their own time, on the go. They're about 15 minutes long each episode, and we talk about trending apps we're seeing. We talk about new safety information we're finding, ways to start those conversations on some of that stuff, as was mentioned, and all of those types of things. And those are geared towards anybody. You don't have to be in Wisconsin to be able to utilize this information. Safety information crosses all the realms. So just because it's on our site, please feel free to use that and share that widely. We've also got a monthly e-newsletter. We've got modules that parents or guardians and children can go through together based on some of these safety topics. But then we do have some of those tip sheets, as Deborah was saying, based on specific platforms. So some of those popular ones that you're seeing out there, Instagram, Twitter, Snapchat, we've got tip sheets based on those popular apps. But I will say, please do take a look at those if you're interested in those, but know that they will always need some sort of updating, because these apps are updated all the time. And that goes back to that message of really think about focusing on the behavior versus the app, if at all possible, because they do change so frequently. And even the apps themselves that are popular will change so frequently, and they'll go out of style. And you don't want to be waiting for a new tip sheet to come out from somebody so that you can have that discussion about what you want that online behavior to look like.
That's great advice. And, so many tools for that kind of proverbial child safety toolbox for parents who are joining in tonight. So I really encourage all of you at home to visit these websites, look at these tools, because they will help ease those conversations that you have to have with your kids. All right, now let's shift gears just a little bit. Let's say something happens. A parent discovers that their child is engaging in some risky behavior, or perhaps they've been targeted by someone. Now what? What do parents do in these situations? And I'd love to hear from both of you. Shall we start with the law enforcement side with you, Dana?
Sure. It's a tough call, right? Because there's a lot of different things that might be happening within that situation, right? So I think that it depends on what's going on. It depends on the age of the child. It depends on the immediacy of the situation. If there is a safety concern or an immediate threat involved, those types of things are going to amp up the way that we respond to this, right? And the way that we would want to recommend that parents respond to this. But I would say, just as if there is no immediate concern, I would say one of the best things that you can do is submit to the Cybertipline, because that gives us a lot of initial information before it even gets into the hands of law enforcement. So it lets us kind of connect some of the dots. It lets us know if maybe there are more reports on this and it's a bigger issue than we're aware of. And then it makes sure that it gets it into the correct hands as far as the location where it took place, so that we can hit the ground running with with that investigation. However, that takes time because there's a lot of steps there. So if there is something where there's a concern, there's a threat, there's a threat of violence, maybe those types of things that make that a little bit more of an immediate need for assistance, then I'd recommend reaching out to local law enforcement, and they can start looking into that. They can connect with ICAC personnel if they need to. But again, it's really going to depend on the situation and what you deem is kind of the urgency level of that.
Absolutely. Susan, what would you have to add to that?
All that's really important, and I think it's great for parents to kind of know what to expect in those kinds of investigations. I think my first piece of advice for parents would be to try and stay calm. So kind of anticipate that this might happen. None of us want it to happen. None of us want to hear from our child that they've gotten targeted online or that they've, they're in some sort of exploitative situation, but it might happen. And so for us to kind of prepare ourselves and stay calm. And that's important for a number of reasons. One is that if we express anger at a child who's reporting something to us, a whole range of things, but particularly, child sexual abuse, online exploitation, the child may misinterpret our anger as being at them. And we want to, even if our anger is rightly placed at the offender who is harassing our child or sending our child images that they shouldn't be sending to a child, the child may not understand that, especially if it's a young child, and they may think, they are in trouble with you, even if that's not your intention. And then, of course, you may be angry at your child. You may be angry that your child was on a platform they weren't supposed to be on, or that they made a bad decision about engaging with someone online or whatever. But what we want to avoid is shutting our kids down so that then they take the lesson away from that I should not go to my adults about what's going on. I should just try to handle it. We don't want kids handling particularly online exploitation on their own. We want them to report. We want them to get help. We want to be part of their support system. And what we hear from survivors of child sexual abuse material online, which is what we legally and sometimes still refer to as child pornography, what we hear from them is, that the image is continuing to circulate and causes additional trauma. And we know that when kids have, say, a nude image circulating around school, what causes additional trauma is people seeing it and giving them a hard time about it and harassing them about it. And we don't want to be in that group. We don't want to be in the group of people who is making this child feel worse for what's happened when they're already going through something that's really, really hard. We want to be their support circle. And so staying calm, and even if there's a conversation to be had at a later date about what the online expectations were, in that moment responding to your child with empathy and support and saying, we're going to figure this out, we're going to report it. I think the other important, in addition to what Dana said about reporting to authorities, reporting the Cybertipline, I think it's also important for people to know about the second link that's there in the chat, the Get Help Now page, because not only can you report to the Cybertipline, but the National Center can also be helpful in facilitating, notifying those platforms about getting imagery down. So we have a team at NCMEC. My favorite job title is being part of the takedown team. And their job is to liaise with those platforms and let them know, hey, this image has been identified as online exploitation. It needs to come down, and they will follow up and they will help kind of move that all along with as much speed as possible. Because again, what we want to avoid, what active circulation. We want to avoid it, no matter how the image was generated or why it was put out there, we don't want it circulating still 10 years later. We want to get it down as quick as possible. So reaching out to National Center, and you'll see that page has a lot of resources, including a guide to contacting the platforms yourself. You can call us. I mean, just reaching out for support is so important. And so, for parents to kind of set that tone. I also think, as Dana said, focusing on the behavior is really important. So I think our first instinct as parents sometimes is to take the tech away and say, well, now you can't have a cell phone because this is what you're doing with your life online, and I don't like it. I totally understand that impulse, but thinking there's a behavior going on here, and that behavior needs to be addressed, whether it's parent to child, whether it is reaching out, for more support from a mental health person or the school, but understanding what is driving that your child's, maybe risky behavior, especially if it's a repeated issue, and digging a little deeper, because we know taking that phone may just make things worse. It may make them more secretive. They may find another way to get online. So focusing on addressing the behavior as much as possible, in addition to, thinking about boundaries and tech use.
All right, so we're keeping emotions in check. We're supporting, we're reporting. And I want to make a quick plug before we get to Q&A. Our August 10th Parent Connect session is going to feature our Family Advocacy Division, and they're going to be taking a deeper dive into how parents can support their children if they have been exploited. So please join us for that. But in the meantime, if you do need assistance, please reach out to the resources that Susan and Dana offered. There's links in the chat, and we have additional website links at the end of the presentation as well that you can capture, and they'll also be sent to you in an email follow-up. So you will have access to these resources. But the quickest way to connect with the National Center is probably to call our national hotline, 1-800-THE-LOST. And if you need immediate assistance because there's an emergency, of course, call 911, right? All right, we're going to move on to our Q&A portion. So hopefully folks have been dropping questions into the Q&A. We're going to check in with our moderator, David, who is going to let us know what our questions are at home. And if you still have a burning question that you haven't dropped into the Q&A, it's not too late. David, what questions do we have from our audience?
All right, Deb, here's a question that's repeated a few times. It's mostly dealing with teenagers. It says, my teen says I'm invading their privacy when I want to check their phone or talk about what they're doing online. What strategies can I use to get to talk to them or get them to talk to me?
Okay. Susan, would you like to chime in on that?
Dana and I are both like, you want to take it? Yeah. I mean, that's really challenging. And certainly, you know, again, as we've said, those of you who have younger kids who are listening, you pave a smoother road the earlier you start. It is hard to walk up to your teen and kind of try to have a different relationship in terms of monitoring. I think part of this, though, is also for, you know, kind of like I said before, having realistic expectations and also understanding that, you know, there's a balance here because teenagers need privacy. I mean, I think, again, many of us didn't have social media or phones in our pockets when we were younger. But if you can think about, you know, if your parent literally read every note you passed in class, overheard every conversation you had with your friends after school, I mean, that wouldn't be appropriate and that wouldn't have been comfortable or welcome for you either. And so, you know, we need to figure out a way to monitor without, you know, being really overbearing and taking away their privacy. So to kind of take the teenager side for a second and say that there is some, I think sometimes parents, because technology is so new and scary to us, sometimes we have a desire to really try to bubble wrap our kids a little bit more than maybe is feasible or even developmentally appropriate. So that's kind of the first thing. I do think, you know, you can also, you know, from the parent perspective, I think it's appropriate to have rules. And as Dana said, that was one of the building blocks, right? Ground rules are okay. It's okay if your kid's mad at you. You probably enforce other rules about curfew or after school activities that your teens don't like. And technology shouldn't be any different. You know, if you feel like as a parent, you're setting an appropriate boundary and a ground rule to stick to it and, you know, to enforce it despite griping, and just think of it again as any other way you parent. You also wouldn't let them, I don't know, stay out till 3 a.m, have no idea where they are. And so if, you know, you're setting appropriate ground rules, it's important to kind of think of it as a parenting thing and do it the same way you do other things. I was gonna say something else, but I can't remember. So maybe Dana, if you want to pick up here and then I can pick up if I remember my thread.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree completely. And I think that the best thing that I can recommend is to explain to them that why you want to check and what you want to check, right? And so as Susan was saying, it's kind of that agreed upon thing that you're going to be doing. So it's not that I'm going to be reading through every single text, or maybe it is. Maybe you've had some issues there and maybe you do need to check in on some of those texts every once in a while. But generally, maybe it's more of like, we just want to look at your privacy settings with you once a month or something like that. Or I want to know what apps you're using because I care about what you're interested in and what you're involved with. So let's agree that we're going to discuss these types of things regularly. And as part of that, I might check into ABC.
Yeah, no, I think that's good. And I think I remembered what it was. No, I did not.
That's all right.
I was reading the next question, but I think that's all super good advice. Mostly.
David, what's our next question?
And pretty much I think with the answers that you guys just gave answers this question, because it's mostly, you know, communicating with the child or the teenager. But this one, again, and we got a few questions on, do you recommend any special or certain apps to help monitor the teen's phone? And I think you guys answered it by saying it's not monitoring all the time, it's communicating with them. But that question keeps popping up here on our screen. You know, is there a certain app that you can use?
Yes. Communication is key, right?
We're going to say the same thing, right? That we can't endorse any specific apps or anything like that. I will say if you choose to go out and research some of those apps to help you with parental monitoring, and if you choose to use some of those as another tool in your toolbox, I would recommend not doing it secretly, right? To let your child know that you are using those monitoring that monitoring software and why you're doing it, and then maybe talk to them about how they can advance to a point where you're not using that anymore, and earn that trust to break away from that. Because if you're using it secretly and you're using it to kind of spy on them, it's going to be very difficult to set up that kind of trusting relationship as you progress with that down the road.
And thank you. You helped me remember the thing that I wanted to say, which was, for teens and monitoring, exactly what you just said, that monitoring and checking in should be collaborative with your teenager and transparent with your teenager. Totally agree with that, and lots of problems with monitoring secretly. So I think that's great. I think parents, just like you said, it's a tool in the toolbox, but also to have awareness that there's always a way around it. Even if they can't figure out a technological way to get around it, they can go to a friend's house. They can borrow a friend's device on the school bus. There's absolutely no way to totally shield and monitor everything your kid's doing online. So that's, again, as we said in the beginning, not a good goal to have as a parent, but it could be something that is useful.
Awesome. And we have a couple minutes left here. We probably have time for one more question, David.
And this one is for elementary age children. Is there any safe social media sites for them, for the kids that are elementary age?
Sure. I mean, there's definitely apps and sites that are safer, that are built with the context of younger users in mind. But anytime children are accessing the internet and potentially communicating with people you don't know, there's a risk level there. So they might be involved in something that's age appropriate, like Roblox. That's a really popular one that we hear about and see online. But we also see some risky behavior, some enticement activities once in a while happen in Roblox. So there are some of those things that are, Facebook Kids, all those things are geared towards kids with that in mind. But there's still some level of risk there, and you want to make sure that you are keeping those discussions going about how they're using those, and you're checking in on that.
And also remembering, I think that's all true. And I think, anything that allows communication between two people, I mean, if I've learned nothing else looking at Cybertipline data, it is that anything that allows communication between two people is unfortunately a possible vehicle for exploitation. That's just because we're talking about behavior and people's behavior, and any way they can communicate, it can facilitate exploitation.
Okay, I haven't forgotten to comment, but this particular one kind of really made me aware that I needed to say something. Parents need to understand that if their kid is online and there's not an adult standing right there watching them, that kid is unsupervised, period. It's messed up, but it's just, that's the way it is. It's just like that kid standing in the middle of the mall. Yeah, physically they're not going to get stolen away from you, but you have no idea what they're reading and who they're talking to, who's talking to them, who's monitoring them. So if parents can just get their head around the fact that, dude, the world is a scary place online and you need to be concerned about it, I mean, that would be a great place to start. No, I don't want to have people take away their kids' devices or things like that. Everything these ladies are saying is right. You can't stop it. But as a parent, you need to understand that your kid, when they're unsupervised online, they're unsupervised kids, period.
We also need to keep in mind that sometimes kids are victimized by other kids, especially older, younger kids. So, older, 12, 13-year-olds, and they're talking to, 4, 5, 6-year-olds. I mean, that's possible as well. So in our messaging to kids, focusing on behavior, not just don't talk to strangers, but if anyone, even someone you know in your real life, is asking you for this type of pictures, pressuring you to do this kind of thing, is sending you inappropriate things, even if it's a kid, even if it's someone you know, like, we also need to be equipping our kids for that. So there's no way to have a totally safe site, but as Dana said, there's certainly, as you're researching things, you can find things that have less connectivity or more monitoring, available, and setting those screen times and green zones, like all those things you can do as a parent to make those platforms safer, and certainly choosing things that have, communication channels that are easier to monitor, easier for your child to block or turn off. Like all of those things are important considerations when you're trying to pick a good app, but there's no app I can tell you like just let your kid loose and never talk to them about online safety and they'll be fine. That app doesn't exist, unfortunately.
Right. Of course, there is Into the Cloud at netsmartkids.org.
No, I mean, that's a good,
and yeah, there's great activities and games that kids can do there as well, and it reinforces safety, right?
Yeah, no, that's a great point about netsmartkids.org. We made it on purpose so that it doesn't jump off to anything else. And that's something good to look for, you know, just in not even platforms, but websites to keep open. There are lots of educational websites where your kid has plenty to do, games and videos and stuff, and you can make sure that it's not linking back to other channels or other websites. And there are a number of kid sites, and NetSmarts Kids is a great one.
Sure is. And on that note, we are out of time, folks. And, you know, I want to thank everybody at home for joining us this evening and giving us your time. And much thanks to Dana and Susan for lending your voices to the conversation. And thank you, Kathy and David, for helping behind the scenes. You know, you can screen grab the slide that's on your screen right now for some overarching resources. And of course, if you want to view the recording of this training, you can visit our NCMEC Connect training platform at connect.missingkids.org, and you can use the login, same login that you use for this webinar, to view the recording, to view all the other wonderful and robust trainings that are available on that site. And of course, please share it out with your friends, your family, your colleagues as well. So, you know, hopefully you'll join us the next time for Parent Connect on Tuesday, June 22nd, when my colleague Belinda Swan is going to be chatting with our NCMEC teammate Callahan Walsh and with Jeff Haynes from Common Sense Media, and they're going to be talking about gaming and live streaming. So until then, be well and stay safe. Thank you so much.